Hello once again, everyone. So decided to do a little extra video this week, and I'll do another one next week most likely, which is a lot of our people have been coming back, which is great to see. And of course, their desire to spar with other weapons has been coming up, because a lot of us have been doing just longsword or just whatever weapon we had over the course of this quarantine. And so one of the weapons that we were sparring with quite a lot before we had to shut down was Dagger. Now, we here at RCH have our own way of sparring with Dagger that I think is quite beneficial. And I'm not saying it's the only way to spar with Dagger. I'm not saying it's the right way to spar with Dagger. I'm saying that this has been working very well in regards to getting people to learn the Dagger techniques, getting them to employ them, and kind of cutting out some of the gamey nonsense that appears when people try to spar with Dagger. So let's talk about some general sort of things, and then we'll go into my specific rule set. So first and foremost, the dagger that you're probably going to be sparring with is going to be one of these. So this is a cold steel rondel. You may also see the wider sort of leaf-shaped cold steel daggers. Either of these are fine. Anything that is nice and flexible and safe to use, right? Now, with these, of course, you're generally simulating either a rondel or a bollock dagger or a basilar or something along those lines. Of course, they do have edges, and they can cut. But we don't see a ton of cuts in the KDF system. We don't see a ton of cuts with the dagger in Fiore. We don't see a ton of cuts in general. It's not that they can't be done, it's that they have very limited capacity compared to the stab. So most of the time we're going to focus on the thrust, but if you can land a significant cut, that's okay. Now, the main thing that we see when it comes to people playing with dagger is the following. So I've got Jake here to help me. The main thing that you'll see when you see people try to play around with Dagger is that rather than me giving dedicated attacks that he will have to use his techniques to deal with, they're going to be kind of that kind of stuff, right? And, you know, there is something to be said for that, but one of the things I wanted to focus on when it came to coming up with a rule set for my people to spar with Dagger was to get them being aggressive and to get them actually throwing those dedicated attacks. So twofold. One that kind of helps the defender, and the other that teaches the attacker to attack. Now, the reason that this matters is most people don't really think about the idea of how do you attack with a dagger. And for the most part, it boils down to, you know, stab. But here at RCH, we do a lot of armor. And anyone who's done a little bit of armor can tell you, when you pull out that dagger, it's not as uneven as it is for us outside of armor. Outside of armor, I have complete advantage. Inside armor, I have to get into the gap, I have to fight him off, I have to do a lot of things that are a little bit more tricky. So knowing how and where to attack aggressively becomes a lot more important. So, what I recommend is getting people into the idea of being efficient. When I am the one with the dagger, it is my job to finish him quickly, efficiently, and you can even give certain target areas. Now, at the moment, we're both wearing gear from waist up, which is what I generally recommend. That's what you're generally going to have. But I may go specifically, okay, I'm focusing on stabbing the head. I'm focusing on stabbing into underneath something. I'm focusing on stabbing into the nape of the neck. Places like that. So you can limit your target area depending upon what you're trying to encourage. You can even discourage cuts for just dagger alone. Not a terrible idea either. Now, the rules generally boil down to this. You have fencer A and fencer B. Fencer A has the dagger. I need to hit him 3 times, either concurrently or with space in between. Either's fine. But if I hit him 3 times, I hand the dagger over, we switch roles. And I recommend you try not to use the language winning. I still do from time to time, but I want to avoid this being a game and focus more on efficiency on both people's part. So, I can hit him, for example, 1, 2, 3, that's over. I could hit him more 1, 2, 3, doesn't matter. You have 3 hit points, basically. Also encourage it to be continuous. So, if we're moving around, I'm not going to stab him and we're going to go, okay, all right. Because that defeats the purpose. If he is in armor or we're playing with a more realistic idea, if you get stabbed once, you're not going to go, well done, right? Keep going. Keep the fight going because there's also going to be more opportunities presented. If I'm close enough to hit him once, he's close enough to probably defend himself against that second attack, and that changes things. So, make it continuous. Now, the next thing, of course, to consider is what defensive options does the person without the dagger have? So, when he comes at me, I can use all the plays I generally know. And depending upon the skill level of people playing, you can limit things. So for example, Jake here doesn't know a ton of dagger. I know a decent amount of wrestling, right? So we could say, okay, I'm going to focus on just trying to get the dagger out of your hand. We won't worry about any throws. So he comes in with an attack, and I'm just going to focus on trying to get that away from him, whatever the cost. Okay? I'm not setting up a throw, even though I could. I focus on the dagger, and if I can get it out of his hand, we switch roles. So now I have the dagger, I go to step in. Maybe Jake's a little more advanced, and it's like, you good with throwing? Okay, we'll go for setup because, hardwood floor. So he comes in with that attack again. I focus on setting something up, okay? I ate one stab to do it, whatever. And we're like, okay, cool. And we're back out. Make sure it's an actual setup, not just, in place. That gets more advanced stuff. If we are both comfortable throwing, wearing enough gear, we can even say, okay, I'm going to try and take you down. He gets to throw me back, though. So same setup, right? He comes in, I block, I try to move in, he's got something better than me, I get thrown. That's a thing to consider. The dagger guy can use all of his weapons the same as I can use my lack of weapons. So, if I get the dagger out of his hand, if I cast him to the ground, and generally here at RCH we try to make it also so you have to either get away from them or remain on top of them, then we switch roles, and I now become the person with the dagger. Now, there are, of course, some techniques that are a little bit more violent. There's, for example, give me a stab, right? Setting up for arm breaks and things of that nature. That's obviously a little bit dicey. So, in general, I'd recommend, depending upon the advancement of your players, say, don't go for any joint things, nothing like that, or say they're, of course, only to set up. In general, I'd say, especially when people are starting out, even if they are experienced, it's exciting, adrenaline's going to be pumping, just disallow those, okay? Focus mostly on just, the not get stabbed game, and people will generally start gelling the way you want them to. Now, the way this will be played, he's got the dagger, he's trying to stab me, all that great stuff, right? And I'm trying to defend myself. Encourage movement. If he's coming up against me, I should try and just get some distance. This buys me life, this buys me time. I don't want to just be stuck there and he's going to attack me, because that's not ideal and that's not realistic, right? Other thing to encourage is just getting away, right? He comes in to attack me and I try to stop this, it's not really in my favor. I'm just going to get away again. If I'm just out of there, I didn't get stabbed. Other thing to encourage is the idea of not grabbing onto the dagger too much. So you'll probably see this more than a few times where someone gets like both hands onto the blade and we're doing this number. That's going to be pretty bad. I would go ahead and count that as a hit. If it's going like this and you haven't just gotten the dagger out of their hand, that's a hit. Now, alternatively, if, for example, I do manage to get it while it's still and do something to get it out of his hand, that shouldn't count as a hit. And even if it did, that's only one. So I'm good either way. But don't let people get in the habit of holding onto that dagger and getting just absolutely cut up. Because, while absolutely you would probably do it in a realistic situation, none of the techniques that we're trying to encourage do that. So that's what we're going to, for sake of what we're trying to do, let it go. Now, that's the general idea of dagger against unarmed. And for the most part, you should do that first always. Even if we're going to move up to doing dagger versus dagger, which I'll explain the rules for in a moment, we're going to first play at least a couple rounds of this to get us into the right mindset. So, now we're not going to play full rounds, but we are going to show a little bit of what that looks like. So, here's dagger first. Yeah, you probably have me on that one. So, we had 3 examples there where He came in, tried to do something, I backed out. He came in, I tried to grab. He switched hands, which was a good later sort of play thing that we do allow. I got out of there, and on that last one, I mucked up and he probably nicked me. So at that point, I'd still have 2 hit points, we'd keep going, we could switch roles, same idea. But that's the kind of flow we're looking for, right? Now, another important thing to encourage, at least that I think is worthwhile encouraging, is use of the aggressing arm. So if you have the dagger, a lot of people tend to only focus on, the pointy thing, and it looks kind of West Side Story-ish after a while. There's nothing wrong with just grabbing onto somebody so they can't run away. At this point, Jake has 2 things to worry about. He has me stabbing him, and he has the fact that he can't get away. So I would highly encourage people to start using that as well, because that definitely changes the way you play, and gives you certain options that you don't usually think about. Now, when it comes to dagger versus dagger, the rules mostly remain the same, except obviously now we've got 2. You'll probably see this happen a couple times where we'll both have daggers and we'll stab each other and we both die, right? That's not what we're looking for. So what I recommend is you take the speed back down and focus on the idea of flow. So we both have our daggers out. I'd go ahead and dictate someone as the agent versus the patient. If you don't know agent-patient rules, agent gets the right to first attack. That doesn't mean patient has to stand there and get hit. That just means that he gets to attack first. 1, 2, okay? Then we're playing. At this point, we're in kind of neutral things. We can swap into whatever makes the most sense for us, right? Something along those lines. But as long as someone has to attack first, you will probably get out of a lot of those double situations, which, someone's always going to get the dagger out first. It's going to end up that way anyway. Other things to consider is now that both daggers are out, there's going to be a lot more slicing and cutting. So now we bring up those rules. So let's go ahead and step closer to the camera. So, you can just kick my mic that way. So, when it comes to using rondel against rondel or whatever, if he stabs at me, right, doing that is not a bad option. It defends me, it cuts him, it's great, right? Leads into one of my favorite combos that I have put on film before, which is slice, grab, stab, right? That's great, wonderful. Slices in that regard, totally count them as a hit. Of course, I'll want to follow it up with something a lot more lethal as quick as I can. Alternatively, other things to consider is, for example, we end up in this sort of position. If I can get this across his face or something along those lines, I'd count that as a hit. But it's only 1 hit. I still have to follow it up with whatever I've got to do, right? Those are where slices are going to come in a lot more. And of course, with dagger on dagger, you have more opportunities. For example, if you can do those numbers, that's of course an option. So more advanced plays will start coming out when it comes to thinking about, okay, the dagger's here, but I'm also still wrestling, I've still got all those tools. So how does the fight end now? Well, either I stab him 3 times without getting stabbed 3 times myself, or alternatively, I lock him up in such a way that he can no longer attack, either by throwing or disarming his dagger, right? And there's a million different dagger disarms, there's a million different throws, but just something where, right, he comes in, I deal with it, I lock him up, he's not going to go anywhere, right? Boom, he gets his dagger back up, we just keep going. And that's the main reason I say, even if you're going to play double dagger, first play dagger alone. So you get into that mindset, you get into that speed, you start thinking about those things. So, now I'm going to throw my mask back on, and we'll show a little bit of double dagger. I'll you be the agent, by the way. All right. He's agent, he attacks first. 1 each. 2, 3. All right, you got me on top of the head, so that's 2 on me, 3 on him. That's 1 round done. I will take agent this time. 2, 3. So, I did eat a scratch for that. Well, I followed up quick enough, so that was it. Now, obviously, as my luscious locks fall out, it's not ideal. It's not perfect. Not every exchange is going to be beautiful. But I find that this has gotten a lot of people who haven't done any dagger, or a lot of dagger, into the right mindset to be able to start pulling off those plays they're looking for. There are other Dagger games you can play. I'll do another video probably on some of those and some other general things like that, but I think this rule set works out pretty well for getting people to start doing what you want to see. Otherwise though, gear requirements pretty much just waist up is usually fine. Of course, gorget, padded jacket, things along those lines. Light gloves is pretty good. Lacrosse gloves are honestly probably a better idea, or padded gloves like this. But in general, just whatever the skill level, take it easy, take it relaxed, and try to encourage those behaviors. But otherwise, thank you very much, Jake. That's our Dagger sparring rules. And we'll talk about some other rule sets and techniques another time.